Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's now 7 p.m. We are live online.
Okay, shall we get started? Good evening, everyone. So this is a workshop meeting, and while it's public, this is for the council to sort out what they're doing at the next regular meeting, which is next Monday. Let's see who's here. I observe Molly, Jeff, Amber, Paloma, and George. The mayor's here. Pam is excused and is out of town. Nick, our city attorney, is in person, and Natalie, are you online?
I am.
All right.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, so let's start up. We've got the interesting ones up front and then the easy ones at the back. So first one is that local law we're concerning East Main Street. So that's the 1 East Main and the Hudson Valley Brewery area there. And either Natalie or Nick, you're going to introduce the general topic and then tell us what's different from the last time?
Right. Thank you, Mayor. I think Natalie's going to do the main explanation, but just as a way of refresher, the City Council received this local law and introduced it based upon a recommendation from the building inspector. It was referred to the City and County Planning Board. A public hearing was held, and notices were also sent to the individual owners of the property subject to the rezoning. At the last meeting, you closed the public hearing, but you asked to workshop it so you can consider the City Planning Board's comment memorandum. The county said that it was a matter of local concern. The City Planning Board considered it at their March meeting and suggested that there be an examination as to whether this is appropriate to rezone from the light industrial district to the CMS or to the general business. They agreed rezoning was appropriate, but wanted to have the City Council have a discussion about not so much the use is permitted under each of those three districts, but rather the dimensional setbacks and how that might affect not the existing building, because it's an existing building in grandfathered, which is in the historic overlay district, but if there was future construction down the road. And then Natalie, I understand you had taken a look at consistency with the comprehensive plan, as well as looked at the GB zoning district and whether that was appropriate or whether it should remain in the CMS as proposed in the local law. And at this point, I'll just ask Natalie to comment.
And may I just clarify, Mayor, I just want to make clear this is only for 1 East Main Street. It does not include the Hudson Valley Brewery, which was a point of contention. So it's just for the one property.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I can start with the planning board's letter that you all received that's dated March 17th. So they had some good questions. I think they generally, as Nick said, agreed with kind of the permitted uses, but they had, I kind of organized it into two buckets of questions. One was with the CMS district, right, because that's the proposed rezoning right now. They had questions about whether the dimensional regulations for CMS would make sense. Specifically, they were asking questions about the front yard setback and the side yard setbacks, which have minimums of 0 in the CMS, and whether that would be appropriate either for an addition to this building or if this building for some reason was demolished and there was new construction here. So I started looking at that one. I can share my screen if that's helpful. I'm just on Google Maps. And so I kind of did a cruise around the area. This existing building, the one across the street, and many on the road in East Main do have 0 or nearly 0 front yard setbacks. So I don't think that regulation from CMS would necessarily be out of character with this property or with the corridor, right? If you were looking at the street. CMS does require a minimum of 0 or a maximum of 10 feet. So the existing building would be complying with those regulations. I also, they have the concerns about additions and expansions of this. And so I think it is worth reminding ourselves that this property does fall within the HDLO. So there are additional restrictions or regulations in place about any kinds of additions or expansions on this site. And then I also, within the CMS district, there's also a lot of reference to the historic architecture and architectural design, more so in that district than any other district. So again, because of that point and that concern the planning board I do still feel that CMS is the best kind of zoning district to respond to that. And then the other thing I thought worth noting is that within this area, the existing building is a little bit non-compliant in that it does have 4 stories, where 4 stories are not traditionally permitted on East Main Street within the CMS. It's a specific line about that 4-story. So I think that is something worth keeping in mind too. If the building was to go down and be rebuilt, it actually would be smaller in terms of height because of that 3-story restriction. So overall, I thought that was a good exercise. The other question they had that Nick was alluding to was whether, GB, there's a lot of similarities between uses that are permitted in the GB district and those in the CMS. And their question, which was a good one, was, would it make sense? There are some GB properties around this area as well. Would it make sense to rezone this to GB rather than CMS? So that it's a little less of a transition, I think was their thought from the LI district. Ultimately, I think I have some concerns with the GB district. So when comparing permitted uses for GB and CMS, GB does permit a number of uses that are not permitted in the CMS, so we would be opening this site up to that. Some of them seem like they could be, appropriate: funeral homes, bed and breakfast, daycare, but there is a number of larger uses like vehicle sales, gas station, auto body repair, ambulance services, wholesale and storage, and plant nursery, that if we went the GB route, we would be allowing those on the site, which doesn't seem in character with the surrounding buildings, with Roundhouse right across the street. The GB would also add a restriction in regard to the minimum lot size per unit. So it requires, 1,500 square feet per unit, which on a site of this size, which is just over 56,000 square feet, that would set the maximum at 37 units. I don't know if that's necessarily a negative against the GB district, but just noting that that kind of restriction does not exist in the CMS. But there are other limitations in terms of height and the HDLO regulations that kind of regulate form. So whether that density requirement would be necessary or appropriate here. And then the GB district does require front yard setbacks of 15 feet and side yard of 20. So based on the existing building on the site and the form, that did seem a little bit out of character. So all in all, I think it was a really good exercise that the planning board did. Let's not just look at uses. Let's make sure we're checking the dimensional regulations of each district to make sure going from LI to CMS does make sense. So I think that was a worthwhile exercise. But in the end, kind of based on the points I went through, I do believe that CMS is the most appropriate for this property for 1 East Main. And then just to Nick's point about we always kind of do a review of the zoning of the comprehensive plan to see if there's anything that is inconsistent between what is being proposed and what's in the comp plan. And largely, there's an overall land use goal with regards to land use that says maintain the character of established neighborhoods, protect and preserve sensitive ecological areas, and encourage the development of the central business district, the train station area, and underutilized industrial properties along Fishkill Creek, which this would kind of fall within the central business district and Fishkill Creek. And then also, I think really worth noting is in the proposed land use map within the comprehensive plan, this was identified as high density residential. In the existing land use map, it was identified as industrial, and then where the comprehensive plan was going, it showed this area as an appropriate area for high density residential. So I think that also kind of is consistent with what the council's looking at in terms of rezoning to CMS. So that's a quick overview of the kind of dive I did based on those comments, but happy to answer any questions if folks have them.
Natalie, I read a third option that the planning board considered, which was to adjust the uses in light industrial, presumably to include coffee houses and restaurants. Did you take a look at that option as well?
I did not yet. I mean, that would involve kind of looking at the rest of the LI zoning districts where they fall in the city, not just, I think so that would be a little bit wider. So I did not get the opportunity to investigate that. I would say just because of the nature of the LI, you could do that, but I think then you start moving away from I guess when I'm just looking at this site and I'm looking at the area that it sits in, and it sits along a main kind of commercial corridor, granted off of Main Street, but still in a pretty significant commercial corridor. The reason it probably is LI is because it's left over from the days of, you know, industrial uses needing to be proximate to the creek. So I did not get to do that analysis, but I would still just argue on its face that putting this building towards CMS, which is a district that seems quite appropriate for it, versus modifying other districts and potentially other areas of the city in order to kind of bring this building more into compliance. The change to CMS seems like the more logical and efficient kind of change there.
Yeah, that makes sense to me as well. I just looked at every parcel in the CMS, and every parcel in the CMS except 3 that front 9D, all front Main Street or East Main Street. And this one does front East Main Street, so it strikes me as appropriate. The other 2 parcels that we originally talked about that aren't 1 East Main do not front East Main, even though they're listed as having an East Main location, but they don't front it, they don't have an address on it. So I think it's appropriate that we use the CMS zone, and the criteria can be, you know, fronts Main Street or East Main or the first block of Route 9D, and then you've literally got them all. The only exception I can see is if you remember the little building on Commerce Street that was recently redone, since CMS doesn't front Main, fronts Commerce. And that's literally the only one I can see on the list. So I think it's the right way to think about it. I do think we need to harmonize our zoning a little bit, which will take a little bit of effort, not tonight, but to look at GB, LI, CMS, T, to say, do we have our uses the correct ones? Do we have our setbacks correct? But for now, I think this one's correct.
Yeah, I would echo that both of these items, the first 2 on our agenda, kind of make me want to dive in more deeply to zoning. The third element that I don't think you touched on this directly, Natalie, I don't know if you can speak to, is the level of architectural review. I believe that's different in CMS than it is in GB, but do you have any insight into that, and can you let us know?
Yeah, there are kind of form-based regulations within the CMS that do not exist in GB. GB does not have those additional kind of layers of regulations. I think the one thing is it would still get caught by the HDLO, right? The HDLO chapter 134, there's kind of design regulations within there for historic properties. That applies kind of as an overlay no matter what district you're in. So that would apply to GB, but then CMS like has an additional kind of section of siting design regulations that just do not apply to the GB.
Natalie, could you tell us what the rear setbacks for CMS are? So I'm just wondering if
I believe rear setback is, let me just pull it.
because the rear of this building is the Fishkill Creek.
I think it's 20.
20, but it may have been, I'm trying to rectify my code that there's a section in the written code that says 25, so I'm not sure if.
In the use and dimensional table, it's 20, but I'm having,
Yeah.
I feel like
it
I
is
need a
20,
ruler.
sorry.
George,
Yeah,
the rear
the
of which
correction
building? One
is,
East Main
the
Street?
correction
One
is
East
that
Main, yeah.
in the
Fishkill Creek is the
CMS
side.
district, it used to say
Fishkill Creek
25,
is-
and that was
where's the
corrected
front
to
of the building?
20. So 20 is the rear
Yeah.
setback requirement.
And just to clarify, Natalie, with respect to the 1 East Main Street property, which consists of several separate condominium units as well as the retail space, the front is East Main Street, the rear is the Hudson Brewery lot, and then the 2 sides are the railroad to the north
Yeah.
and then the Fishkill Creek to the south.
Yeah.
And just remind me what the side setback is then?
0.
So theoretically then, if this building were to be torn down and rebuilt, it could be built right up to the creek?
It could not because we have an easement along that property for the trail.
Okay, but not just up to the trail then? So
Yes.
pretty close to the creek?
Yeah, although historic overlay would come into play, but if it's a complete, burn down or something, I don't recall what the rules are.
And it would require site plan approval.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something that we can think about when I'm going to get a group together to kind of look at all of these. but it should be things like, if it's not on Main Street or if it's not adjacent to other buildings, do we think there should be a setback? And if so, how much? Or do we leave it to the discretion of the planning board if it doesn't have directly adjacent buildings, something like that? Oh, and by the way, I have to correct my earlier statement. There's a couple of lots on the first block of Main Street that also are in CMS that don't front Main Street.
So the next step is if the council is ready to proceed with the local laws drafted, if there are no changes, this could be placed on your Monday, April 21st agenda for consideration of approval.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel generally comfortable with it. I will say, echoing Molly and Lee here, I think with some of the things we've been thinking about, the Fishkill Avenue, the Arno building, it is probably a good idea to get under the covers with the use and dimensional tables again. So I think that would be a good use of time to revisit this. I think the last time we did a really comprehensive review of it was probably 5 years ago, maybe a little bit more.
I think we harmonized uses pretty well.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe we didn't do as much with.
Well, I think the goal there was to simplify the tables and
Yeah.
consolidate. It wasn't a deeper dive into are these the appropriate uses within each district, line by line. We did consider that, but it wasn't the
Yeah,
goal.
yeah.
So I'm willing to say, why don't, if we're willing to move forward, that this is the correct district, even if every zoning aspect of the district may not be exactly what we want, I'll assemble a pack of geeks and we'll take a look at this, and then we'll bring it to council. We will not do this in council, otherwise you will kill me. But we'll do it offline and then bring something forward and explain what's different if we've come up with something. Is that all right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And if anyone wants to be a geek, you can let me know. Is, all right?
I love zoning, so you can, yeah.
It's what turned our community around, or one of the key elements, so. Okay. Anything else on one parcel, two East Main, one East Main, sorry. One East Main.
One East Main.
Shifting from LI to CMS.
The only thing is, and I just want to confirm really more publicly, so everybody who owns a property at 1 East Main would have been provided with a notice of the public hearing, right? And did we have any outstanding questions from those folks that we needed to answer? I know we had somebody come to the public hearing a couple of times, but I'm not sure if we heard from any of the other owners or if there were other concerns that came up.
I don't recall. To answer your first question, yes, each owner on parcel access was sent a copy of, was sent a notice with a link to the local law as well as the, how to get to the use regulations to look at that.
Okay, so they were informed, okay.
Yes.
And other than the comments we received, there's nothing outstanding that people asked for?
There was no separate, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You want to go on to item 2? So that's also a zoning law, and that one concerns self-storage and drive-throughs. And again, Nick or Natalie, you should start this up.
And just to frame this, so the city council has workshopped a number of times to propose local law regarding drive-through facilities and self-storage businesses. You referred it to the city and county planning board. You held a public hearing in your March meeting. That public hearing was closed. And you received a comment from the county planning board that was a matter of local concern. You also received written comments as well as verbal comments at your public hearing. And you received a comment memorandum on March 17th from the city planning board offering some of their comments. And I'll ask Natalie to summarize her comments and just give you an overview of your conditions. Natalie?
Nick, your mic got shut off. I don't know if you just passed it over to me.
Thank you. I apologize. I'll just repeat. A brief summary is that the City Council has workshopped this local law on a number of occasions, referred it to the County Planning Board, which issued a letter that it was a matter of local concern. You received public comments, both written and verbal, at your public hearing, which you closed at your meeting in March. And the City Planning Board issued a comment memorandum on March 17th that is in the packet, in which I'll ask Natalie to summarize and add anything else she wishes to add before you open up your discussion. Natalie?
Thank you. Yeah, so we have not made any changes to the proposed local law since you last saw it. There was a discussion with the planning board at the same meeting, and a letter issued on March 17th, where after discussing the proposed amendments, the 5 planning board members that were present or in attendance expressed concerns, and these were concerns that they shared. The Fishkill Avenue Concepts Committee had circulated kind of a draft of recommendations to them before they came to the council as well. And they shared those concerns then as well, that they're opposed to kind of the categorical prohibition of these uses of drive-through facilities as an accessory use and self-storage. The board members encouraged a more specific approach to identify areas within the city of Beacon, either on a district or a district by district approach, or by looking at areas within individual zoning districts where these uses should be prohibited rather than a blanket approach. Although they did not necessarily have any specifics for kind of that analysis. That was their comment. And so, you know, I think it is an interesting point because you do have the Fishkill Avenue Committee did make this recommendation. I think they are well aware of kind of the planning board's aversion to outright prohibition. But again, I think based on their memorandum that was circulated to the council, still the majority of them still felt that prohibiting these uses was necessary for kind of the future vision of a more pedestrian-oriented corridor that committee is working towards. So, and similarly to what we did for 1 East Main, I also did do a review of the comprehensive plan, as we always do. So the mayor's mentioned this before. I think that the 2017 comprehensive plan is relatively silent on Route 52. Most references to the corridor are describing existing conditions or uses along the corridor. However, there are a few sections that are worth pointing out that I think do provide somewhat of recommendations for the corridor. So in section 2.3, which is in the land use and zoning goals recommendation, the following recommendation B is focus growth in the central business district. So this specifically says encourage growth in and around the central business district rather than out along Route 9D or Route 52. Focus areas of greater density should be within the city's central commercial core and the waterfront train station. So I don't believe the proposed local law that's in front of you is inconsistent with that, as it is kind of restricting uses within that corridor, not adding additional. Section 4.2 within the comprehensive plan kind of just notes that participants felt that business district on Route 52 served the needs of larger businesses, requiring large buildings and on-site parking. Suggestions for this area include improving the streetscape and landscaping, encouraging the development of a movie theater, office supply store, garden supply store, supermarket, large office buildings, and education centers. So again, I don't think there's anything in there that is expressly inconsistent with what we're talking about today. And then finally, one last recommendation was that Route 52 should maintain existing retail and service mix in the Route 52 business district while improving the character of the area through pedestrian amenities such as sidewalks and street trees and improved architectural design. They also asked to require property owners in this business district to provide sidewalks, street trees, and improved architectural design during site plan review, and then exploring funding opportunities to provide streetscape amenities. So I think while that last recommendation does discuss kind of maintaining the existing service mix, the remainder of the recommendations focus heavily on pedestrian improvements. As self-storage is not mentioned as a prominent use in the existing conditions inventory, nor any of the recommendations, I do not believe that the proposed local law is inconsistent with the comp plan in that regard. And then additionally, preclusion of drive-through facilities does not limit the mix of uses, right? It prohibits a specific car-oriented accessory component of those uses, but all the uses, coffee house, banking, fast food, any of those uses that are permitted would still be permitted, so you're not restricting the use, just this accessory component. So that's my initial analysis on comp plan compliance. Happy to answer any questions from the council.
So, first question, which is, the zoning changes in front of us apply to citywide or certain districts?
I mean, when we were looking specifically at districts within the Fishkill corridor, so GB, LI, HI. By changing those, they would apply to all those. I think that's where we went based on the initial kind of conversation with council, is that they apply to all those districts throughout the city. We're not just saying within the Fishkill Avenue area.
Okay.
Would it be worth considering, rather than outright ban, saying that a storage unit, a facility could not front the main street, or 52 in this, for example, here that we're talking about, that it has to be, because there's some sizable properties along 52, and it might be appropriate tucked in the rear of those properties, like Kemprine and John Deere and so on. And where the current one is, it also doesn't front 52.
Yeah, because I believe the planning concern of self-storage is the use is so infrequent that if you're looking for an area that will have heavy pedestrian use, you're not going to get any, right? So if you pull it off of Route 52, or you certainly pull it off of Main Street, that makes sense. But citywide, I'm kind of with George.
So you could do so, but they could get an area variance from the ZBA.
Well, yeah, they can get a variance for anything that we do here, right? Or a variance.
Well, right, use variances, if you say it's prohibited, they have to get a use variance, which is extremely difficult to get. If you permit it, but have certain linear dimensions, then they can get an area variance.
But they could get an area variance if we've outlawed them fronting on, say, 52.
Correct.
They could front
Then
on
it's-
52 if
yes.
they got the variance.
So you could leave them in place in those zones, but then have a clause that says, except along this route, like along Main Street and along 52.
We could prohibit it in certain areas, yes. We can come with language to limit it, but they may still be able to get an area variance from those
Of course.
requirements, yeah.
And that would align with what the planning board suggested, correct?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Because again, the planning concept is, things are stored there. People don't go there a lot, right? You go once, you check in once in a blue moon, and so it's not encouraging foot traffic, right? So I'm surprised we didn't have one on our main street when it was derelict. So guess we're lucky. Other thoughts?
It's sort of a more general thing about, because we're also talking about, well, let's just stick with the storage facilities. The final draft of this zoning will prohibit and grandfather in some existing businesses along the corridor, such as gas stations, car washes, whatever drive-throughs are there now. I would consider, because they've proven themselves to be businesses that people use and frequent, we certainly don't want to see more of them, but in terms of grandfathering, I would consider eliminating if it burns down or something like that, they would not be able to rebuild because it's non-conforming. So I would suggest that we eliminate that 50% clause and that they could rebuild because it is proven to be a necessary and needed business. And I don't think they should be penalized for an act beyond their control.
So let me see if I understand this. You're saying this isn't a particular use. This is in general when we have a non-conforming use. We have a general clause that says if more than 50% of the structure burns down or ceases, that the use discontinues,
Right.
the non-conforming use. And so, yeah, the example would be, we had the two-family structure burned down on Church Street. And because it was non-conforming, because it was in a single-family neighborhood, it has to go back to a one. So you're saying, we would adjust that non-conforming use language?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more inspired by the current businesses along 52. I haven't really thought it out, the impact throughout the city, but certainly on 52. And, there's discussion about, trying not to, for that corridor to be non-car centric. And I don't think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to, we recognize and understand the roles that vehicles play in our lives, and the businesses, whether it's a gas station, a car wash, a laundromat, a Dunkin' Donuts with a drive-through or whatever. These are sort of established businesses that are still necessary and needed in a community. So I don't think we certainly don't want to see a whole corridor full of it, but I think we shouldn't, so we should recognize the value that the existing places serve, and make sure that they alone remain and can continue to remain going into the future.
So if the council were inclined to consider that, that's amending 223-10 regarding non-conforming uses. You've closed the public hearing. That is a different topic. So you would be better off, in my opinion, either A, reopening the public hearing and changing this, or doing a separate law and looking at the non-conforming uses and structures as its own separate local law, because you'd have to refer to the county and the planning board.
Yeah, I think generally I'd be open to that, both for the reasons that you described, Nick, and also I think these are already talked about, and this is one of the reasons why I was thinking about we should look at our zoning more comprehensively. But I agree with that. I like that idea, and at least I think it's at the very least worth exploring. I think it's good to look at some use cases, and are we okay if something happened to our gas stations on Main Street? Do we want them to be able to rebuild? Maybe we do. I don't have an answer to that off the top of my head right now. And so I think that thinking through scenarios and having a group that really can think about that comprehensively would be great.
Yeah, I could see this as a separate law, because it's a distinct topic. And I could also see us, we should discuss it, but one option would be to give the planning board a role, so that's not automatic, but it might depend on circumstances, and we might be able to write some of those circumstances into place.
Yeah.
Right, that they apply for a special use permit, and then you could even set forth some standards that it gets rebuilt to meet modern standards and best practices.
Yeah, and right now it looks like in the use table, those are special permit, if I'm reading that correctly anyway.
Yeah.
So it might be a matter of again, having a little bit of a deeper dive on that specific use case and what would be the special permit criteria for those. I think I'm leaning towards what you're saying, Molly, that seems like something that we can pick up as another topic. I don't see it as being an imminent issue.
I do like the idea of, with self-storage units, thinking about the main streets they front. At first I thought, maybe LI, but we actually have a current LI lot that's off of the end of Main Street as it gets into where the yard is, kind of between Ackerman and Herbert, and that if someone decided to build a self-storage unit there, they actually could as of right now, but it does have pedestrians in front of it. It is, it's at that end, but when we think about the vitalization of that, so there might be areas that we can think more strategically about what's the overall feel we want to have. So the idea of self-storage units away from where we want pedestrians and are trying to encourage pedestrians to be makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think the challenge with both of these uses is kind of the economic value. Both tend to have lower employment as a business model. They don't need as many people to staff. And when I think about trying to provide employment opportunities and, as many of them that are high value as we can in this community, that's a concern I have with both of these uses.
Both being self-storage and...
Drive-throughs.
Okay.
Well, I guess I don't really think about the employment opportunities here, because a gas station, say an existing gas station that has one employee, a Dunkin' Donuts with or without a drive-through, I think, doesn't have significantly more or less employees just because
They
the drive-through.
do. And I'm not actually talking about Dunkin' Donuts. I'm just talking about drive-throughs in general. One of the trends in the industry, especially for quick service restaurants that are a drive-through, is that they employ less people. They just don't need as many people working. Whether that's a concern or not is, individual opinion. It is for me.
Yeah, so if we're switching over to the drive-through topic, I think that self-storage we can deal with by saying not here, but okay there. I think in the drive-through, and in particular on 52, I look back at how long and how careful we were in rezoning to get Main Street back to where it is now. And it was done kind of gradually, which is why you're hearing the planning board say, think about things on a more gradual basis. If you go from 0 to 60, and I do think we all share the same goal of that on 52, we'd like to see it to be residential. It's not going to happen for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. If you do the zoning of what you think it should be 20 years from now today, you're not going to get what you want. So you're going to have to think about how doing this more gradually and how to make that work. Because if you do the zoning now and the market isn't there, it's just going to do auto dealerships and it's just going to sit there for longer than if we try to make it transition over time. So I'd like to see us do that.
So how does that relate to what we're doing tonight?
Well, there are a bunch of ways you could do it. You could try to measure, you could try to, do it over years, you could allow a permit for a period. I think the simplest ones are simply to, there's a proposal, let it go, or adjust the law to say, once you have approved site plan by the planning board, it moves forward. I think that gives you, one. You could do something more than that, but I just think something that's more gradual makes more sense.
So I am a little confused by what I heard you just say. Don't do the zoning for what you want in 20 years today. And my understanding of the argument that I heard from Fishkill Avenue Committee and from other community members is that in the long term, we are interested in a more pedestrian and not personal vehicle centric design for that corridor, but also just as part of our overall climate goals.
Yep.
What timeline would you put on that work?
So, it is not a straightforward task, right? I mean, I'll give you the example, which was the, ground floor apartments on Main Street. We set a 7-year goal of trying to make it happen gradually. If we tried to take it out right away, Main Street would have just stayed empty. So I think today, especially in this environment, we're not going to see any new construction on Route 52. I think the one proposal that was approved is stuck because the numbers aren't working in the current environment. It might be improved because we adjusted the parking regulations. So I think that that's given us probably a 10-year window before anything realistic happens. And I just think if you put in the zoning of what you want 20 years from now, no one's going to do anything. And it'll just stay, used car auto dealership because that's the existing use, and it works, right? There aren't going to be any, you need to build the pedestrian content there before it really becomes relevant. And I'm not sure how else you do it. I would actually think if we want to encourage residential construction, we should think about that area as allowing 4 stories, for instance, or other things that will encourage that residential construction. And I don't see this as, happening without that encouragement. So I think it's going to take a few things.
I think one of the concerns I have about drive-throughs is that it takes land away from other uses. And I don't necessarily see, even within the long time frame of 20 years, that use will go away. I'm thinking of the car wash on Main Street and really that whole stretch between what used to be the Village of Fishkill and the Fishkill Landing in the village of Matawan, that there's a reason why we don't have taller stories. It takes, once things are established, it's much harder to change them. And so I think we have an opportunity here to think about how do we want that land to use. Now, I fully appreciate if we do that, there is the consequence of we might be giving up taxes that we know are important to keeping our city affordable. And so that might be a trade-off, but I think it is worth considering.
My biggest concern with drive-throughs is, and there's been a lot of valid discussions regarding the upside and the downside to having it or not, but I think by allowing it, it encourages those type of businesses, that we see in every strip mall entering into every city and town through America. I think that's what we don't want. And and they're quickly built. And once they're built, they remain forever.
That's a primary concern I have too, George, and I think Molly was kind of getting at that the same space that is available for a business with a drive-through means that there's not another storefront in that location. You just have asphalt. And it does lead to the kind of strip mallization. It tends to take away from streetscapes, and so I think it sets a precedent that, like, okay, yeah, this is what we're looking for here. Put some standalone stuff in, or maybe a strip mall.
It's a virus almost. You see it in every entry to every community. Once one is established, others follow quickly behind.
For sure.
I think that's what we have to be most careful of.
So that would suggest you put a limit on it, right? You could say 1 but not 5 or some number. Another way to do it would be to put a date on it, right? And then you'd have the non-conforming for whatever period you have. What I certainly have in mind is if we're hoping to see residential construction of 3 stories commercial on the ground floor, 2 stories residential, or possibly even 3, the overwhelming value of that will cause the change. Why it's not doing it now is, I think, because the current owners along that section of 52 are not developers. But at some point, the economics will become overwhelming, as long as we set the zoning to encourage those uses. And I think it'll tear down whatever's there. That's happened on Main Street. So.
Look, fast food places, they tend to stay for a long time. They rarely go out of business.
I hear you, but again, if you're taking down a 1.5-story building to build a 4 across an entire lot that's going to bring in 50 units of residential construction, and those commercial uses, they can just wait until the construction's done. That's how I think the economics would work. But
I can really appreciate the conversation with the phasing and potential limitations on numbers, but in terms of time, this idea of zoning now versus what the zoning might be in the future. But I see this not so much even as an isolated area of development. I see this as a corridor into the rest of the city. And we're having conversations about bike lanes, and my concern is I find the drive-through incompatible with encouraging the type of transportation we want to have in that area. And I know we have limitations on what we can do within the city limits physically in terms of bike lanes, but there's a significant representation of what type of activity, what type of movement we want within the city represented by what we do with that corridor. So I think we have a really unique opportunity to set a tone that will have influence within the rest of the city by what we do there.
so the incompatibility is purely theoretical right now. There are no pedestrians on Route 52. And I'd be more than happy to look at a phase out based on pedestrian counts. And the only pedestrians we're going to have are on the other side of the road because that's where the sidewalks are. So again, the incompatibility is all theoretical. And that's my concern, which is we're zoning for the way far out in the future as opposed to what about today? If
So
you
what
want
is
to
the
set up a
timing? What is the timing around bike lane construction or reconstruction of that roadway with bike lanes? Because it's not pedestrians as much as with bike lane travel.
Well, I would say that the rail trail will handle that. And bike lane on that road, every indication I've had as I've asked that is we wouldn't get funding from that. You know, we just got a nod from the Transportation Council that our $3 million request for redoing Beekman Street with Complete Streets is going to get funded. And we're excited about that. The same indications are Route 52, it's adjacent to the rail trail. The county's got lots and lots of priorities, and that's just not one of them, one right next to the other. So if we want to do something like that, my pitch is always going to be rail trail and connections from the rail trail up to 52, as opposed to separate construction on 52 of bike lanes.
But there is the space for them. That is what the Complete Streets initial analysis that the Fishkill Avenue Committee presented us with indicated. And we are already paying for the sidewalks, and the rail trail is several years away. I recognize that this would become a significant municipal project, and I know that you always want it paid for before starting, but I don't see it being completely unreasonable.
I'm really sorry, but our engineer says it isn't reasonable, and the planning board says it's not reasonable, and our planner says it's not reasonable. So I'm struggling here for who's saying it's reasonable as opposed to our experts.
Can I
I'm
interrupt?
sorry, I didn't know that Natalie had said that bike lanes were completely unreasonable. I hadn't heard that.
It was, the comment was whether along the entire length of 52 as a separate event from the rail trail. And that's different from using the rail trail and connecting to 52 where appropriate,
Are we getting off topic?
probably.
Okay.
Maybe, yeah, we should come back.
Thank you.
I have a legal question for you.
That was going to be my
Nick?
question. Yeah.
So
Yes.
going back to, because the way that we frame the law, it combines both self-storage and drive-throughs. If we were to do something akin to what George and Lee were talking about making I'm not quite sure how to frame, it's not, making self-storage prohibited or allow it except for certain areas within that, would that be enough of a change in the law that you'd have to bring the language back and we'd workshop it again? Can you kind of talk through legally if we would still be able to potentially vote on this next week, or if we wanted to move forward with that aspect with self-storage, if we would have to then bring it back?
I have to write it up, but I'm leaning towards that it's going to require, at a minimum, it's going to have to be on your desk for 10 days because it's a substantial change, so you'd have to see it. So it wouldn't be ready for vote on Monday. Whether it needs to be referred back, this is in response to comments from the public hearing and also written comments you received and also part of the planning board's comments. I don't know that it needs to be renoticed because then it's a never-ending cycle. Someone makes a comment yet. So I don't think it rises to that level, but until I write it out and see it, then I'd have a better sense. But my off-the-cuff now is that no, it wouldn't require a rehearing, but it wouldn't be ready to be voted on Monday.
Thank you. I personally am okay with that, but I know other members of the council might feel differently about that. So I wanted to be explicit in that in terms of the things we're talking about.
So that's about
Self-storage, yes.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. Where our discussion went on self-storage, was there a consensus there?
I agree with me.
Yeah, I will say, George, I think your proposal of restricting it based off of frontage seems like a logical step.
Yeah, I think it's a good compromise.
All right, so that's sort of one down. That's kind of where you're heading?
Yes.
All right. The other one then.
The other one I have a legal question regarding. I know there's an approved project that includes a drive-through. Do we run, and maybe this is an executive session, I'm not sure, but do we run into the possibility of any litigation if we don't allow it now?
Yes, look, I think the applicant has expressed a concern about some points that they may or may not choose to litigate. They've been clear about that. As written, the local law would apply to any project because there is no exception. You have in past laws, and other communities do it, and it's no right way or wrong way, you've grandfathered applications. You could really deal with it by saying it applies to everyone, whether existing or applied, those that have been approved or those that are pending before a board. So you have ways as to vary how you make this law applicable. And yes, any further discussion should be in executive session.
I guess I would lean toward grandfathering this approved application at this point, and that being the one and only drive-through allowed along the corridor as a form of compromise. Ideally, I'd like to see none, but I also think this applicant has gone through, from what I can tell, many months and iterations of their plan. And I think one drive-through will not, particularly if we don't allow it going further, it won't trigger what I'm concerned with is an avalanche of like businesses along the corridor.
So the thing I would add is if we go that route and some subsequent council, I won't be on it, says we've made enough progress that there's a lot of foot traffic now, we could phase out the use, just as we did ground floor apartments on Main Street. Right, even though it's existing, right? If we find somewhere along the way that it truly isn't working, or that there's tons of pedestrians, so it's what wasn't a problem now is, we can phase it out.
Wouldn't you still be grandfathered in, though? Isn't that what happens on the Main
you
Street?
can have what's called an amortization period. Rarely used, but it is usable, where you amend your law and you say it's grandfathered and it needs to cease doing business in X number of years. There's a formula that needs to be done. You need to determine, because you want to avoid the takings argument.
Yeah.
But yes, it can be done, and the mayor is correct with respect to ground floor apartments. That was done because
It's what we did,
right.
right? Because there wasn't another way around it. They were going to be there forever.
I mean, if there's, I'd be open to that if there's a way, because that goes to my concern where, drive-throughs there's no, otherwise how do we know that it will change, that it will stay there forever? And it might be that it becomes more and more incompatible with the uses, be it pedestrians, be it the opportunity for denser housing, more housing than we know that we want. And so I appreciate the argument that housing might not happen in the next couple years, but that we don't want to end up with a large chunk of land that is being kept for something that is not actually the highest use the community wants further down the line.
I am not in favor of grandfathering.
Grandfathering's not my first choice, but if it's what gets future drive-throughs banned, I'm happy to continue this conversation about how to tool it.
Yeah, the one thing, if I could just weigh in, the one thing that I do worry a little bit about from a planning perspective of, we just have to think very carefully about what metrics and numbers, if it is going to be something that gets triggered down the road, by, which is, I've seen some communities do that either. I guess you could trigger it on the change of the neighborhood. The one thing from a planning perspective I will say is that you do often have to build the environment first that you want to create, right? Pedestrians tend to avoid areas where they do not feel safe, where it does not feel convenient, or where it's not useful for them to walk, except for those who are most disadvantaged who have to walk there anyways, right? But people tend to avoid areas that are not set up for pedestrians. So I don't know if number of pedestrians would be my key trigger if it was going to be something that comes in later down the road. That's just my one thought.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is if you build it, they will come argument, and this is not building it.
Yep.
What are you whispering about over there?
So, no matter. Yeah, so, okay. Although I actually think compared to what's there now, it will be a draw for pedestrians. Let's be really clear. Right now, when I go to Duncan, I drive 5 miles, either to Fishkill or to Wappingers or to Newburgh, and now people could ride a bike or walk to get there. So I actually, compared to the counts that are there now, it will actually increase pedestrian counts. So again, the comment that this will deter pedestrians is incorrect at this time. It is theoretically correct, but it's wrong with respect to how it will be applied. It's obvious it will increase traffic, cars, bikes, and foot traffic because it's a popular destination.
Well, pedestrians can't use drive-throughs, and I have no objection to a quick service restaurant, which would encourage pedestrians, I suppose, based on your argument.
Well, I think the use is what gets people to come, and yes, if there's a drive-through, I mean, I haven't used a drive-through in 15 years, even though I do go places that have drive-throughs. So they attract people, they attract cars, bikes, all sorts of folks, not necessarily to use the drive-through. Although our handicapped folks will definitely do that. Maybe busy moms, from what we've heard in hearings, will use it, but I don't. And if you're looking for increases in pedestrians, this is a way to get there in day one, because we're in day one, we're not in day 100.
So what's on the table now, I think, are three different things. It's allow them to continue on, don't allow them at all, or don't allow them except for one application that's been approved. Is that the three choices?
I think so.
I think that's a fair summary, yes.
Yeah. So, unless anyone has additional stuff they want to add to that, maybe we should kind of figure out where we stand.
Okay. George, you want to start?
I would ban all drive-throughs and grandfather the approved application.
My first choice would be to ban all drive-throughs.
All right, and I'm with George, which is I'm okay going forward, but grandfather the one.
I would restrict the use entirely, no grandfathering.
No grandfathering for me either.
I'm probably no grandfathering unless we can find a way to have them no longer be allowed after a certain period of time. But if that's not feasible or it becomes untenable, then I'm for no grandfathering.
Okay, so I think we got a 4-3 vote there.
4-2.
4-2.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah,
6
4-2
here tonight.
Yep.
All right, so that's straightforward. I
Yep.
appreciate you raising it. So, all right, very good. Shall we do the last three items all at once? They look the same stuff. Obviously, they're different chemicals. Hypochlorite, liquid polymer, and liquid phase product, all at the wastewater treatment plant. Chris, you want to tell us about it?
Yes, these are placeholders for bid awards that we may bring to you on Monday. We're doing further analysis to see how those prices compare to what we're paying now, and the engineer will be working on a memo over the next day or two. So these are the three primary things that we use in the wastewater treatment process: sodium hypochlorite, which is the disinfectant; liquid polymer, which is it promotes the clumping of suspended solids; and then the odor control, the VX456, which reacts with sulfides and gets rid of that smell that we associate with wastewater treatment plants. So we hope to bring you, again, if we have one that we're paying on the market less for, we may not bring it next week, and we're doing that analysis now. We're a little concerned about bids right now because everything is just in a state of tumult, and supply chains are getting weird again, and so we're going to be careful on this. But by Monday we'll have in your packet by the end of the week our recommendations. It may be doing 2 of the 3 or 3 of the 3.
Chris, can you give a little more context about when these things are needed by? Do we have a current supply that's running out?
We
or?
do have a current supply, and we actually don't have the worst prices on them. We were preparing this bid before all of the tariffs and everything hit. Again, I don't know how this is going to hit these products, but if we don't accept the bid, it just means we're going with a variable market price as opposed to a fixed-in price over 3 years. And it concerns me fixing anything right now because you have no idea where markets are going to go. So we'll see. I think if these are less than what we're currently paying, we'll take it and we'll lock in that So we're doing that analysis now.
So council okay going forward to a vote next week pending that discovery?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
as-
and
as-
Yeah.
assuming it'll be in our packet on Friday.
Yes.
Yeah,
We'll,
no
we'll
objection.
have a memo from the engineer.
Yeah, I might have occasional questions that we might not normally talk about in a voting thing that we didn't get to today, but otherwise, fine.
Well, I know more than I want to about these.
Oh, I look forward to learning
I can
about
draw
it.
pictures too, if you like.
I think Lee called it the not interesting part of the agenda, and I was like, excuse me.
Well, it's a major, these chemical inputs are about $190,000 a year in our budget.
Yeah,
They're-
that's it too. I kind of,
you know,
the
they're-
money part is good
And
for
they're
us to know.
critical to the process, so.
Yeah.
um,
And you've got a chemist sitting right here too, so, you know. you'd be
Oh.
surprised
You can
at
whip
his
them up
interest.
for us?
It's just a matter of interest.
He's going to
You'll be
write
neutral
out
on
the NaOCl.
So different strokes for different geeks, right? It's just what's your cup of tea, right? All right. Anything else on those?
No.
All right. Next meeting's next Monday at 7 here. It will be a regular council meeting. I will be remote, and Pam will be chairing the meeting. And otherwise...
Well,
do
before we adjourned, I mean, there was talk about having the, I think the rough estimate about time was that we would have a conversation about the communications plan. I know we're not prepared for it, but just want an explanation about when we can expect that, or why it didn't happen tonight, or...
We were thinking of putting up in 2 weeks. So we thought this conversation would go on for a long time. So, all right. I also will say I have not had an opportunity to talk to the county. I reached out to the county and the commissioner that came here that does community and family services and therefore the housing material. And I wanted a conversation with that commissioner about what they do to communicate those pieces as opposed to us doing it on our own. They're the ones who actually know it. So that isn't scheduled until my flight on Wednesday, but I think I'll get a chance to talk to that person. She also is on vacation till the 25th, so if it doesn't happen on Wednesday at 10:30, it may happen after I get back. Okay? Everybody good? Yep.
Yep.
All right. Thank you all. Do we need a motion?
You do, yes.
I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. I can second it.
You
right?
can.
I just can't motion. Okay.
Record.
You can?
Apparently I